let me give over to Thami Ntenteni.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and thank you very much to Kingsley and Sis Linda here and to GCIS for inviting me to speak on this occasion and about a man whom I consider to be one of the greatest leaders that South Africa has ever produced. And I feel I am privileged to have had occasion to interact directly with a man or a leader of the caliber of Oliver Tambo. And I will, to a very great extent, use certain anecdotes to answer the question of how he understood media freedom and how did we relate to him as a leader of the African National Congress and as the communication arm of Radio Freedom. However, first, yes, I felt a little bit intimidated when I came in because one lady said she has introduced me and I talk for 2 hours. Now, if you will bear with me, will you allow me to speak at least for 1 hour? Okay, now I cannot resist to kind of set a scene for the circumstances and the environment under which we operated. The program director already mentioned that we operated from exile. And I'm going to give a short quote by Edward Said. And in an article or a piece that he has written entitled Reflections on Exile, he says, and I quote, "Exile is strangely compelling to think about, but terrible to experience. It is the unhealable rift forced between a human being and a native place, between the self and its true home. Its essential sadness can never be surmounted. And while it is true that literature and history contain heroic, romantic, glorious, even triumphant episodes in an exile's life, those are no more than efforts meant to overcome the crippling sorrow of estrangement. The achievements of exile are permanently undermined by the loss of something left behind forever." Edward Said is a Palestinian who also experienced exile. And I think the reason I'm making this quote is that more often than not, when we speak of Oliver Tambo and his legacy and the greatness of his leadership, we actually start somewhere in the middle. We start about an organization that is already functioning and an organization that is already well-oiled to execute the struggle against apartheid. We tend to forget that it was almost akin to actually starting an organization from scratch. The leadership inside the country, it was soon after Sharpeville, the whole leadership of the country had been arrested in Rivonia. Oliver Tambo himself was tasked with the responsibility of going outside and setting up the external mission of the ANC. And the organization had to adopt completely new and unfamiliar tactics of underground operation and under conditions of illegality. I'm giving just that context. I won't go more than that. I think it's quite a long story. But also, sometimes there is a misunderstanding, and I suppose it's a fault of history, that most people think that Radio Freedom began in exile. And that is not correct. The very first broadcasts of Radio Freedom were done inside the country by Walter Sisulu, just immediately after the arrests in Rivonia. A broadcast was done by Walter Sisulu from underground in which he said, "Our house is on fire. The whole leadership of the ANC has been arrested, and I am broadcasting now from underground, from hiding. I haven't seen my family for the past 2 weeks, and however, we pledge to continue the struggle." That was the very first broadcast. Now, obviously, if you broadcast from inside the country, you cannot broadcast for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or even 5 minutes, because it's easy to trace the signal through the coordinates as to where you are broadcasting from. So you have to broadcast for at least maybe 2 minutes and switch off the transmitters so that the coordinates and the signal is not detected. I am mentioning this again as a scene setter. Now, I have started off by making example of the conditions and the circumstances and the history. Once again, I think I want to say this, that having thought and reflected over time about our years in exile and the leadership and how we ended up coming back into the country under the trials and tribulations of exile and under the leadership of Oliver Tambo, I have come to the conclusion and the opinion that in actual fact, every epoch, every era produces the kind of leader who would be able to understand the circumstances and the conditions and be in a position to formulate and devise strategies that would be in a position to meet the demands of the times. And I think Oar was that kind of a leader. More often, we would ask, what is a leader? What are the characteristics of a leader? Is a leader born? Again, those are questions for another day, but some of us find ourselves compelled to actually reflect on these questions and say, how best can we emulate a leader of the caliber of Oliver Tambo? Now, please somebody time me and please indicate if I'm going overboard. But I'll try and encapsulate and compress almost everything that I will say. But it's quite an interesting thing for me. I'll start off by saying that, in actual fact, it is purely by accident that I ended up being in Radio Freedom and being in the media. It was never my intention, and it was never, I never even thought about it. And so, when I arrived in Dar es Salaam, and the proposal was made for reasons that I will not go into now, that I should go and train as a journalist in the then Soviet Union, I flatly refused. I said, I did not come here to go to school. I did not come here to train as a journalist. I came here to go and learn how to handle a weapon and go back into South Africa and shoot my way into South Africa and liberate our people. That was my thinking. And I was convinced I'm right. And nobody was going to shift me from that position. I didn't come here. I wanted to know how to shoot. Various leaders of the ANC came to the place where we were, and all of them spoke to me about the need to go and train as a journalist, and I refused. Until on one occasion, we were told that the president of the ANC, Oliver Tambo, is coming. And we were all very excited. Oliver was coming, and we sat there. He arrived, and there was lots of anticipation. As is normal, we discussed the political situation and ANC policies, etc., etc. He led us in the discussion. That was fine. But at the end of that meeting, he then wanted to see me and a number of other colleagues who had also been seconded to go and train as journalists. But he wanted to see us individually. It is important that I give you this part because everything that I'm going to say after this hinges on that. So he says to me, I am told that you are refusing to go and train as a journalist and to go and work in Radio Freedom. I say, yes, Mr. President, I have refused. And he says, why are you refusing? I say, Mr. President, when I left the country, I left and I wanted to know how to shoot, and I've come here to train as a soldier. He says, well, understood, and I'm very happy to hear that. He then says to me, assuming we were to send you to South Africa now, with all your guns and ammunition and everything, what do you think the people of South Africa would do to you? Do you think they would welcome you with open arms? They would be very happy and say, this is our liberator? I say, yes, I think so, Mr. President. He says, who would have told them that you are coming? Is it not likely that actually when you come there, people will think you are another criminal, and they'll go to the police and tell them that there's a guy there who's heavily armed, and we are afraid of this person. We don't know what he wants, what he has come here for, and you would be arrested. I say, yes, Mr. President, it makes sense. He says, that is what we want you to do. We are giving you a responsibility that is greater than that of the man who will go into South Africa carrying a gun. who are giving you the responsibility to prepare the people of South Africa psychologically to receive the man who has a gun. Actually, what we are asking you to do is much, much, much more important than going into South Africa carrying a gun. And by the way, the struggle in South Africa is not a military one. It is primarily a political struggle, and we have been forced by circumstances to take up arms. We need you to go and train as a journalist and prepare the people. That's a bigger responsibility that we're giving you, because we're asking you to work on the minds of the people of South Africa. I had no argument against that. I said, yes, Mr. President. He said, do you agree with me? I said, no, I agree with you wholly, Mr. President. Only, let's strike a compromise. And he said, what is that compromise? I said, before I go to the School of Journalism in the Soviet Union, I want to go and do military training. He said, no problem, you can go and do military training, and then thereafter you go and you train as a Radio Freedom person. That is how I ended up being a person in communications. And I am giving you this anecdote because in my characterization of a leader is a person who inspires, a leader is a person who has influence. I'm telling you a story that happened more than 30 years ago, but I'm telling to you as if it happened yesterday, because that discussion made an impact on me, but not only did it make an impact on me, it changed the whole course of my life. I understood things and the struggle, everything differently from that conversation that I had with OR. That is the caliber of the leader I'm talking about. The anecdotes that I will give you, I will give them to you within the context of the character of a leader and the legacy of a leader and how OR understood media freedom. But I can only express, it's a bit difficult because at the end of the day, it seems like I'm talking about myself. And we have not been socialized that way. I think even members of my family, they sometimes say, but exactly who are you? You never talk about yourself. But now, primarily the reason why at that point in time, the ANC wanted to have people trained as journalists. There's some historical background to that. The very first thing that the ANC understood when it was in exile under the leadership of Oliver Tambo, besides every other thing of re-establishing the structures, etc., and training people militarily, the ANC understood the value and the importance of communication. The first thing that the ANC asked for in Tanzania was not, please give us guns. They did not say to the Tanzanians, please give us guns, we are involved in armed struggle. They said, please provide us with radio facilities. The first broadcasts of the ANC were done in Tanzania. And you will understand how important it was, because I will tell you that leaders such as Thabo Mbeki were also at one point broadcasters in Radio Freedom. The one who was actually very passionate about broadcasting was Duma Nokwe. Josiah Jele was also part of the broadcasting. Almost all the leaders that you have in mind actually about the ANC cut their teeth in communication and in broadcasting, in Radio Freedom. Remember, I said Radio Freedom started inside the country. Okay. We then we trained, came back. Now, the other interesting thing is that at the time when we arrived in exile, the government in Zambia had closed the broadcasting facilities of the ANC. Now, the reason the government of Zambia had closed the broadcasting facilities of the ANC was that there was a disagreement, a policy disagreement regarding the stance of the ANC and the Zambian government vis-à-vis Angola. The ANC supported the MPLA, and the Zambian government supported UNITA. And so when the ANC was broadcasting on the Zambian facilities, they spoke about the MPLA and said it's the MPLA that is the legitimate, whatever it is.